In Chapter 4, Key Issue 3, which starts on page 126, we are going to look at the origin, diffusion, and distribution of TV all around the world, and we will compare the diffusion of the internet and social media with the diffusion of TV. Electronic media is responsible for the diffusion of most pop culture, so it's important to understand how it's diffused around. The principal obstacle to accessing popular culture is lack of access to electronic media. And that can come from financial, so you don't have an income high enough to purchase a TV or, cable providers or internet providers. Or you don't have, as a nation or as a region, you don't have the money to establish the infrastructure necessary to have, high-speed internet, or, you don't have reliable electricity to watch television. So either it's personal income limitations or, a larger scale economic limitation that prevents you from accessing these materials. Watching TV is one of the most popular leisure activities in the world, and it is still the most important mechanism for rapidly diffusing popular culture around the world. And I know that the internet is rapidly catching up to it, but there's still more popular culture is transmitted through television. And that influence can also be seen through television shows that you watch on the internet. Here's just a pie chart showing you the breakdown of different leisure activities. So the electronic diffusion of popular culture blew up in the mid-20th century with TV. The television originated simultaneously in multiple hosts in the 20th century. So the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, Soviet Union, and the United States. Over the course of the 20th century, the United States went from dominating the world share of TVs to being nearly equal in rates of ownership with most developing countries. So if you look at 1954, the U.S. had more TVs per 1,000 people than any other country in the world. By 1970, the U.S. was on pace with Canada and some countries in Europe. And then by 2005, the U.S. has about the same amount of televisions per 1,000 people as someone in Brazil. And so I would say globally they've kept pace with U.S. television ownership. The electronic diffusion of popular culture with the internet blew up in the late 20th century. And the diffusion pattern, it follows a similar pattern as TV, but it happened faster. So in 1995, internet users in the United States accounted for more than half of the global users of the internet. But by 2011, 77% of the U.S. population had accessed the internet, and it accounted for 10% of the global users. So the global share decreased roughly by 40% in less than 10 years. And what that means, though, overall, it means that more people were still using the internet in the United States. More people used the internet in 2011 in the United States than they did in 1995. But because more people across the world are using it, we don't dominate that market anymore. Same thing with TVs. We have probably more TVs per household now than we did definitely more than we had in 1950 and more than we had in 1970. But because more people throughout the world have televisions, our global percentage of TVs has decreased because other people have more. You can see the same pattern. Internet use really spiked up here in northeastern Europe, but the United States was definitely one of the global leaders. And you can see that it just continued. It happened faster because we're looking at 1995 to 2011, but you see the same pattern. And again, today, because there's more internet users globally, the U.S.'s share is smaller. We also have the diffusion of social media in the 21st century. And you're going to see the same diffusion patterns as you do with TV and the internet. So in Facebook, in 2008, the Facebook users in the United States accounted for 1/3 of global users. But by 2011, just 3 years later, because more people globally were using Facebook, the global share decreased to 1/5. Same thing with Twitter. The United States was the source of 1/3 of all tweets in 2010. And the second leader of tweets was India. And so you can see that same pattern where you have multiple herds and then it kind of spreads out and diffuses throughout other nations. So what are some challenges in accessing electronic media? The external threat is that developed countries kind of control electronic media. So the television industry as a whole is dominated by the United Kingdom, Japan, and the United States. And so leaders of developing countries can view this dominance as a way to impress American values upon their viewers. And what are some American values that you might see in television that could kind of be forced upon or seen as being forced upon your viewers? Upward social mobility. So the United States, we were founded on the idea that if you worked hard, you could go from being, you could go from a low income area, and you could go from a low income background to being rich, right? Like that's the American dream. Well, part of the American dream. But your ability to move from one social class to another, that's not a universal global cultural belief. Freedom for women. And we talked about that a little bit already in the first key issue, but freedom for women. In TV, you see women all the time in the United States and in UK and in Japan on TV shows. You see them interviewed in the news. You see them as journalists on the news, and you see them in all kinds of positions of corporate, political, and other types of power on your television shows. The glorification of youth. Not every country has not every culture embraces the idea of teenagers or prom or, I don't know, we have a very different youth culture in the United States than other countries do. And stylized violence. So we like shows where people beat each other up. We like comic book movies. We like war movies. We have a lot of violence in our TV and we don't really think about it. And so that can be seen as imposing our viewpoint on the world. What are some other challenges? The news media in developing countries. The news media is dominated by the government, whereas news media in the United States is private commercial stations. And both of those have their own biases associated with them. So if you have the news media dominated by the government decides what you can have and what you can broadcast and what you can talk about. The bias in commercial production can be a little sneakier, but it's really led to a lot of our news in the United States being heavily polarized based on the viewpoints of whatever corporation, whatever CEO of the corporation runs our news media. And so we have a bit of our own news crisis going on in the United States right now. African and Asian government officials in countries where the news media is dominated by the government criticize the freedom of the press of the United States. They don't think that we convey an accurate viewpoint of other countries. And I think that when you look at journalists who have integrity, we certainly do a really good job. But we do have this fragmentation of our media and this polarization of our media, including our news media. And that certainly isn't going to reduce bias. I do want to say that that being influenced by a corporation right now is still far more free than being told by the government what you can and cannot say. So I wasn't trying to make these two problems sound equal. Within a region, social media can cause threats as well. So within a country, you might limit access to television because you don't want people to see things from other countries. So if you are in a dictatorship, you might want to prevent people from accessing information that would be censored by your government. So if your government's doing something and your country's news stations are controlled by the government, they don't want you to see what the BBC is reporting on it, right? They want you to only see their viewpoint. You can also try to limit internet content. So you can limit political content. So if anybody was trying to oppose your government, you could limit that. You can limit social content. So in some countries, like Instagram photos of someone in a swimsuit would be, inappropriate. In many countries, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, those things are banned completely. Conflict and security. You can limit access to information about armed conflict or border disputes, and even just internet tools again. So limiting, so some countries you can't use Google. Some countries you can't even get on Facebook if you're, unless you know a back doorway to get into it. like when I was in China, I was only there for a few days. I was there for about a week. I couldn't access like Facebook or Instagram or anything while I was there. And I certainly didn't want to try to do it, in a way that would be illegal because, I'm a rule follower. But, maybe if I was living there for months, maybe I would be interested in finding a way to access social media. And people do. Here you can see a map of countries that are limiting content on electronic media through through pervasive filtering. So if you look at China, political content is pervasively filtered. So they limit what you can see. Social content is selectively filtered. Conflict and security information is pervasively filtered in China, whereas internet tools are selectively filtered. Some countries have no data. So some of those countries might not have data available because they don't want you to have it. They don't give the global community access. Some nations may not have enough access to social media and to the internet to really collect much usable data on it. And then you have other countries where there's no evidence of filtering information. And so these are areas where you have like freedom of the press. We could look at Russia real quick as well. So Russia has selective or suspected filtering of political content and social content. But conflict and security, so like border conflicts, you can access that information. And there's no filtering of what like social media tools or search tools you can use.